So no easy answers, nothing to celebrate, but is there something to be optimistic about, or should we be ashamed of these figures 65 years after independence? Joining me tonight on that debate, Dr. Soumitra Chaudhary, member of the Planning Commission and somebody who was involved in the drafting of that report. Thank you, sir, for joining me. Also joining me, Dr. Himanshu, Assistant Professor of Economics at JNU. I'm also joined by Dilip Cherian, well-known image consultant, also someone who tracks what's going on in the political and corporate corridors of power, a different India really from the India we're talking about tonight. And when we talk about that reality we saw in Mumbai, Kishore, who lives his life like that, we also have in the studio tonight two young men, Tushar Vishisht and Matthew Cherian, who tried this experiment of living like an average Indian, living on 32 rupees a day. They ended that experiment in Diwali for a month, and their experience, I think, has some important insights into this. Let me go across to Dr. Chaudhary first. Dr. Chaudhary, the Planning Commission often seen as the villain when they come out with an estimate saying that you're poor if you earn 28 rupees a day, you're not poor if you earn 30 rupees a day. Yet in the reality of India today, is this fact something which gives you cautious optimism? Because the Planning Commission has, of course, highlighted the fact that there's been a sharp drop in poverty in India.
I think we should get some things clear. When we say this is a poverty line, we are not saying this is an adequate line of existence or is a sufficient line. We're saying it's a poverty line. And below that, people are poor. And just not the poverty line, everybody is not at the poverty line. There are people much below the poverty line. This is a serious issue. If we want to see what the change has been over a period of time, we have to have a common methodology. The methodology from time to time has been set up by expert committees. The one that we're using was from a committee chaired by the late Professor Suresh Tendulkar. He also set out guidelines of how we should update the poverty lines once the 2009-10 survey data becomes available. And that is what we have done. It's a time-consuming process, and it has taken time. We got it working, we got it checked out, and that's when we have released it. It's nobody's argument that these are comfortable or adequate numbers. This is a number. It could be any other number. This is at the end of the day to consider what is poor. There is a limit of subjectivity. But once we settle what the poverty line is, as Tendulkar settled what poverty line, what we are trying to see is how have the distribution of people around the poverty line changed between 2004-05 and 2009-10. Our press note brings out that change.
But Dr. Chaudhary, the point is, you said that this is not, we're not saying it's an adequate poverty line, but when you define 28 as poor, the obvious corollary of that is that 30 rupees is not poor. Surely that's the reasoning, the methodology, even though recommended by the Tendulkar committee, which has been criticized by so many.
See, every line will have people just above the line and below the line. But spare a thought for those people who are much below the line. You know, this is the poverty line, for example, for the rural population is now estimated at 33%. That is the fourth decile, which means there are people between 1 and 30% of the distribution, which is much lower, as much as 50% below the poverty line. So it's not just an issue about those who are just around the poverty line. I mean, you know, they can be it's a matter of opinion. But there are many people far below the poverty line. In fact, the bottom 15% is a cause of serious concern. So one has to take this in terms of throwing a light and not really an argument of whether it is just below the line and above the line. Any line, for any line, that property will be true.
Let me just actually take this debate more, not so much into the macro issues, but go back, as I said, to these two young men, Tushar and Matthew. Tushar and Matthew, if you can tell us, because you, of course, are examples of two people who often have crossed over to what many describe as the other India. It really seems we talk so often, politicians talk about the two Indias. You are a group of two young men who've actually made that crossover to see how the average Indian actually lives. Tell us about that experience, because I think it does illuminate what so many of us seem to ignore, even as we talk about it incessantly.
I mean, sure. Our experiment was a month-long experiment where it was divided into two parts. One that we tried to live on the average Indian income, which was the mean Indian income at that time of 150 rupees per day, ex-rent, which translates to about 100 rupees a day. And the second part where we tried to live on the proposed poverty line of 32 rupees a day. Specifically on the second part, we tried to live as closely as possible to the Tendulkar committee distribution of expenses between food and non-food expenses, and tried to follow that very strictly to understand what that entails for our lifestyle as well as our impact on our health. And I mean, it was a difficult exercise. To comment on what the poverty line, proposed poverty line is, which is 32 rupees, only about 17 rupees is allocated for food, which restricted our nutrition choice to only about 1,300 or 1,400 calories, as compared to someone who's a normal worker. You probably need about 2,000 calories in a day to survive. So the direct example was, I personally lost about 6.5 kilos during that 1 month, and our cholesterol levels fell below the healthy levels. So it was a difficult process for us. I can only imagine for a hard worker or a manual laborer whose calorie requirements are more like 3,400 or 3,000 calories, it would be a difficult situation. And I'm not surprised by the fact that most of our manual laborers are bone thin and suffer from early arthritis and bone deficiencies and other problems because of that fact.